Jim Skillen has gifted us a set of reflections on the identity crisis of the United States, highlighting several important points. Essentially, Skillen observes that the American state has been turning into a kind of vast marketplace governed by powerful interests that control Congress and other aspects of the United States public sector. He points out that the federal constitutional order of the United States Republic is increasingly being governed as well as interpreted by the Supreme Court as a marketplace. He states, given what Donald Trump did and tried to do in his first term as president, directing more government benefits and power to big corporations and the wealthy, suggests that in his upcoming term, he will strengthen, perhaps even solidify, the movement of the United States toward the identity of a marketplace. Or the outcome might look more like a privately owned company whose chief investors and directors constitute a corporate oligarchy under his autocratic authority. In either case, Congress and Supreme Court may find themselves shrunken into toddlers tagging along for the ride. The rise and popularity of Donald Trump would be the result of this drift of the Res Publica toward a kind of plutocracy governed by major economic powers. This seems particularly confirmed by the appointment of Elon Musk as the person in charge of supposedly getting rid of the inefficient institutions of the state. Skillen observes a notable trend of the regime acting above or against the law, which goes strongly against the great American tradition of upholding and strengthening the rule of law. Another notable internal trend of the regime is its attempt to solve practically all the world's problems, from the war in Ukraine to dealing with Mexican cartels and the conflict in Gaza. In particular, it has been threatening the Mexican government, accusing it of being allied with organized crime, now labeled as terrorist organizations, and of not doing enough to contain the flow of fentanyl from Mexico to the United States. In order to pressure the Mexican government to finally assume its responsibility to fight criminal organizations, Trump has been threatening to impose tariffs of up to 25% on Mexican products exported to the United States. The reality is that the previous regime, led by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, was extremely negligent in its responsibility to guarantee public security and limit the power of criminal organizations, which have grown enormously and even come to dominate certain regions of Mexico. Another disastrous policy of López Obrador was to open unrestricted migration from Guatemala through Mexico to the northern border with the United States. From the early days of his regime, officials of the same regime encouraged the formation of large caravans from Honduras, indiscriminately opening the door in the south for them to transit toward the northern border. This was stopped by Trump in his first term, but as soon as Trump left the presidency, these caravans resumed, through which around 5.5 million illegal migrants managed to enter the United States. In addition to this, López Obrador allowed or encouraged the trafficking of fentanyl to that country. It is not surprising, therefore, that President Trump has currently declared Mexican criminal organizations as terrorists and is strongly pressuring the Mexican regime to abandon López Obrador's absurd policy of not touching criminal organizations. In fact, what he demands from President Sheinbaum is a strong partnership between Mexico and the United States to jointly fight criminal organizations with a full force of both countries. Surely, with the President's authorization, American spy planes and drones have been flying over Mexican territory, through which information has been obtained that has allowed the capture of a significant number of drug traffickers and reduced the large peak of fentanyl to the United States by 60 to 80%. I estimate that he will soon not reduce the pressure of the Mexican regime until it is standing shoulder to shoulder with American forces in the task of rooting out criminal organizations. Skillen notes that the immediate political crisis Americans are experiencing is the attempt by the Trump administration to undermine the U.S. Constitution and multiple institutions of the federal government. As one commentator put it, nothing is being created, much is being destroyed. The same is happening in Mexico. There is a tendency to undermine the Constitution, destroy government institutions, and control and dominate other branches of power by the central executive power with a messianic attitude that effectively seeks to place itself above the law. The conflict of López Obrador with the judiciary, which practically led to its destruction, was because the judiciary restrained his messianic aspirations by forcing him to respect the law. Let us remember López Obrador's infamous statement, "Don't come to me with that the law is the law stuff." It seems that a similar tone has been adopted by the new US regime, challenging many laws so that the judicial rulings are piling up against him. Just like in the United States, the current Mexican regime intends to move to a winner-takes-all electoral system, eliminating the proportional representation seats currently in place to completely nullify the opposition. Finally, Mexican primary education up to 12th grade has been reasonably adequate, as it taught the history of Mexico, albeit not without ideological distortions, universal history, universal geography, and promoted a sense of civility. The new curriculum, the New Mexican School so-called, is a mishmash of Marxist ideology. It exalts regimes like those of Venezuela or Cuba, and is decidedly woke and victimist. From Mexico, we look appalled at the transformation that our admired northern neighbor is undergoing, shifting from being a world example of the rule of law to a messianic plutocracy whose leader, very similarly to Mexico's tropical messiah, López Obrador, demands that no one come to him with that the law is the law stuff, as if he did not need to respect the American laws and the international agreements signed by the United States of America. Well, that is the legacy of López Obrador.